Hello, everybody. It's me again, Lavender Moon here, also known as Tanya. I'm going to do another mystery story, murder mystery. It's not really mystery because they have been solved, which is always great news. It is still from the book by Harry Spiller, Murder in the Heartland. Um, I don't know if a lot of you do read. Sometimes you don't have time to sit and read a book. That's why I'm doing audio versions of this book. Um, that way you can just listen. If you're at work and you can wear headphones, if you're running and wearing headphones, you can just listen to the story. So that's my contribution to help out with that. That and I love murder mystery stories, true crime. Pardon me, allergies are kicking my butt. But we're going to get started so this isn't a very long video. Um, and I hope that everybody had a wonderful Easter. But we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, the title of this is Bizarre Sex Murder. And it happened on July 2nd, 1985 in Harrisburg, Illinois. On July 3rd, 1985, the temperature was a sifting 96 degrees and the humidity was close to 100%. It was a typical summer day in southern Illinois, unpleasant though it was. For the Hicks family, the past 24 hours had been anything but typical. That afternoon, a relative entered the Harrisburg Police Department and reported that a 6-foot, 150-pound, 32-year-old Ronald Dean Hicks had been missing since the day before. He was described as having black hair and brown eyes. And the relative reported that one of Hicks's children, a neighbor's boy, saw Mr. Hicks pull into the driveway at around 6 p.m. and then back out and then head east, and he was alone. The victim did not report to work on July 3rd at the Chevrolet garage, and none had been located. He was wearing a light blue shirt with a cloth name tag and over the left pocket, dark blue pants, and steel-toed work boots. A family member said that there was no clothes missing from their home, and they believed that about $100 on him when he left. The communications radio logs indicated that a truck registered to Ronald D. Hicks had been located by a city patrolman the night before. The truck was located near the Animal Control Building on Feasel Street. Since there seemed to be nothing unusual about it, the information was just logged and forgotten. The officer assigned to the case, Assistant Chief D. Pelhank, and several officers conducted a search of the vehicle, the area around the dog pound, and the city barn near the location of the victim's truck. The keys were missing from the vehicle, but there appeared to be no foul play. So the search of the area was fruitless. Pelhank obtained a list of friends and relatives of the family and began contacting each. The victim's employer said that the victim had clocked out at 5:18 p.m., hung around the garage until about 5:30, and then he left. He saw nothing unusual about his behavior either. None of the other people interviewed had seen him. The investigator then canvassed all the local bars, and a bartender remembered seeing Hicks between 5:30 and 6. She served him one beer, and he drank it and then left, and he was also alone at that time. Pelhank was baffled. Hicks had been seen by 3 different people between 5:30 and 6 and then vanished. Harrisburg is a very small mining town with a population of only around 12,000. Rumors were rampant and the pressure was on. Pelhank contacted the Saline County Sheriff's Department for assistance. And on July 8th, the 2 departments, using motorized trail bikes and a 3-wheeler, conducted a 4-hour search of a 5-mile area inundated with thick vegetation and strip mines. And south of the location where the victim's truck had been found, once again they came up dry. 3 weeks had passed and not a shred of evidence hinted at whereabouts of Hicks. Pelhank decided to contact a psychic. What did he have to lose? He called a well-known psychic from Connecticut. All he had gotten out of his mouth was, "I have a missing person," and she began to talk. "There is definitely a truck involved," she said. "I am in the truck. Then I get out. I am talking to a lady with light brown hair. The longer I'm in the truck, the madder I get. My head hurts and it feels like I'm being taken out of the truck. I feel like I keep seeing hilly terrain. The next thing I know is I'm having a hard time breathing, and now I am making the sign of a cross. I hear gunshots. I see a cowboy hat. I see a green car, an older car. There must be an old gate there, or maybe some boards there that buffers the water. I'm sorry. An old building flashes through my mind, and an old building, dilapidated, no painted, and it smells funny, like someone threw a sewage or dead animals or something like that. The information did not help the detective, but he couldn't shake her comment about the truck and the gunshots. He had not given her any information about Hicks, yet her first comment was about the truck. After a week passed and he still had no new information, Pale Hank called the psychic again. Again, before he could give any information about the victim, she began to ramble. There is a railroad truck or trestle close by there. About 100 yards. Go there. There's where the coon hunters always run their dogs. There's a path. And then go down that path. Right along there is where there you ought to smell something. There's where we ought to come up with something. The detective meditated. Even if she were right, it would be looking for a needle in a haystack. There were hundreds of miles of railroad tracks and dozens of trestles in the area. The officer felt helpless. With no leads, he had pulled his last card. The deck was now empty, and he still had no clues of the missing man. 3 months passed before the police got a break. It was on November 2nd, 85, at 11:35 a.m. Communications Officer Joanne Schmid received a call from a local resident. He informed her that he had discovered a body in the northeast section of the county. Directions were given to Schmid, and Detective Bergrob met the caller at the residence. The caller took Bergrob at the scene, which was 200 yards from across the Saline County line in Williamson County. As the detective passed the empty wood-frame two-story house with the dilapidated unattached garage, he walked down a deeper path and noticed a railroad trestle about 150 yards. He couldn't help remember the familiar description given by the psychic. About 70 feet down the path, the detective came upon the body. One look was all it took for Bergrob to realize it was the skeletal remains of a human being. The remains were scattered along the path for about 15 to 20 feet. Mixed with bones was a pair of steel-toed, lace-type boots that had been chewed or torn away until all that remained was the sole, the heel, and the steel toe covered with a leather-type material. There was a pair of pants and a brass-type metal buckle with an R in raised letters. The pants were blue and still on a leg bone. A blue shirt with blood stains lay among the bones. Detective Berggraf requested assistance from the crime scene technicians Jerry Barnes of the Illinois State Police. He arrived at the scene at 1:10 p.m. The officers began processing the crime scene by photographing the bones and surrounding area. Berggraf cataloged 3 locations on film and marked the bags as evidence as each item was collected. The search turned up 2 small metal articles to the upper left where the body had apparently been lying. The 2 slugs were found among bones and fingernails from one or possibly both hands. The hands appeared to be high on the right side. Both bullets were lying above ground and within inches of each other. After all the bone fragments were collected and the soil where their body had apparently lain was inspected to a depth of approximately 2 inches, nothing else was found. An inspection of the skull showed no damage. However, several other bones appeared to have been chewed by animals. The officers cleared the crime scene around 4 p.m. Berggraf contacted Harrisburg PD to inform them about the skeletal remains found. He also ascribed at length the other evidence found at the scene. So on November 5th at 12:15 p.m., crime scene technician Barnes, Detective Berggraf, and Detective Pelhank met at the Williamson County Sheriff's Department. The detectives were sure they had the remains of Ron Hicks, but positive identification had to be made. Pelhank provided dental records to the tech. So on November 4th at 9:32, V.A. Beadle, M.D., examined the skull, lower jaw, and dental charts and positively identified the victim as Ronald Dean Hicks. One of the officers contacted a realty company in Harrisburg to verify the owner of the property. The owner was contacted by phone, informed of the incident, asked for permission to drain the sewage lagoon for possible evidence. The owner gave permission, and the officers drained the pond for possible evidence, and none was found. On November 4th of 1985, police began an elimination process of suspects. A close family member to Hicks was contacted first and agreed to take a polygraph examination. Saline County Chief Deputy Miller and Assistant Chief Pelhank conducted the examination. The officers began by asking about the events that took place on July 2nd, the day Hicks was reported missing. The question and answer session went as follows. Were you present when Ron Hicks was shot? No. Did you help or plan to have Ron Hicks shot? No. Do you know who shot Ron Hicks? No. Do you know of anyone who might be mad at Ron Hicks? None that I know of. Was he involved sexually with anyone else? Well, a time or two I thought he was. What made you think that? The relative squirmed slightly in her chair, paused for a moment, and then she began to explain that for a period of time she and Ron had been involved in a swingers group. She indicated that sometimes she and Ron Hicks had sex with other couples, and sometimes she had sex with other men and Ron at the same time. They had not been involved with the group for about a year, but she provided detectives with the names of the people and couples she had been involved with at the time. The relative indicated that as far as she knew, the victim had no recent contact with any group members, nor did she believe any of them would have any motive to murder him. An hour and a half passed. The interview was about to end. I don't know of anything else tonight. Anything you can think of? Yes. This is what I was trying to figure out. Was all these things with this psychic, the green car, the little man. How in the world could a little man handle Ron? That's just, The green car, I can think of 3 people I know who have a green car. And the police department has already got that. They all have older green cards, but Bud Sullivan's car is a 78, and the other ones are all older. Well, you can't put a whole lot of stock in that. That was just a psychic, Maybe it's valid, maybe it's not, said Pelhank. We aren't going to solve this case by that psychic, muttered the relative. For the next several days, officers interviewed the people that relative indicated were in the swingers club. One person stated that he and his wife had a marital dispute, and his wife moved in with Hicks. While he was visiting his wife and children, a relative brought out nude photos of Ron and members of the swingers club. Also, on one specific occasion, his wife, several swinger members, and Ron went into Evansville for one evening and rented a motel room. They had sexual intercourse in front of his wife. She had told her husband that she did not participate. The husband indicated that he and his wife had worked out their problems and had not been in contact with Hicks' family for about a year. The wife was interviewed and verified her husband's story. She also stated that she had not been involved in any sexual activity. A neighbor was questioned and indicated that she visited with Hicks. She said that on occasion there were problems, but other than that, things seemed to be okay. Also, she said that on one occasion that Ron had asked her to join the swingers club. The neighbor, of course, declined. According to her, 2 or 3 males a day would come by the home. The neighbor stated that she recognized only one of the male subjects, who was a regular. He said that he had first met Ron through his car service, that he had met one of those close relatives before Ron was introduced to him by a mutual friend. Officers had conducted an extensive canvass for the past 5 days. Although the activities of the Hicks were somewhat bizarre, there seemed to be no motive for the murder of the victim. They turned to the Division of Forensic Services and Identification of Illinois State Police. Through visual, microscopic, and chemical testing, the blue-gray shirt did not reveal the presence of any smoke powder residue or lead white. Although there were 2 holes in the side of the back panel and one in the bottom of the front left panel. The lack of smoke powder residue determination of the bullet were not suitable for microscopic comparison. The officers were frustrated. They had exhausted all leads, still no motives, no suspects, and they were back to square one. 7 months later, on May 23, 1986, Detective Burgaby received a call from Chief Deputy Miller. Miller indicated that he needed to meet with him because he had possibly come up with some pertinent information in the Hicks case. In the mid-afternoon, Burgrab met with Miller and Pelhank at the Saline County Sheriff's Department. The officers told Burgrab that a reliable source had advised that a local citizen and a cab driver by the name of Bud Sullivan needed to be interviewed because he possibly had valuable information about the Hicks homicide. Miller had already asked Sullivan to come in for an informal interview. During the interview, Sullivan told police that he had dated Mila Ring from rural Harrisburg for the past year and a half. Further, he was a good friend of Ron Hicks and had introduced Mila to Hicks. Later, the two had dated, he added. Sullivan indicated that Mila told him that he had shot Ron on July 2nd, 1985, but didn't say why. When the interview ended, Miller informed Burgrab not to put substantial credibility in Sullivan's statement until further interviews could be conducted with Mila. The officers contacted Mila Ring and told her that everyone with prior contacts with Hicks was being interviewed. Mila readily agreed to be interviewed. Officers informed her that she was in no way compelled to speak with them, but she indicated that she wanted to help in any way she could. Chief Miller, alert for reactions from Ring, started the interview with the comment, "We have information that you have dated Hicks." Ring quickly responded, "Bud Sullivan must have told you that." "Yes, he did," Miller answered. Mila continued, "I dated Bud for about a year and a half, and he introduced me to Hicks. They were good friends. Bud told me about Ron's swingers group, and I never participated with the group. My only dealings with Hicks was when my car was being worked on, and usually Bud took the car in and picked it up. He was extremely jealous. Didn't want me around any men, especially Hicks. Bud was so jealous that he has on numerous occasions beat me for just looking at or talking innocently to another man." "Are you still dating Bud?" "No, we broke up about 2 weeks ago," she said with a giggle. "I'm going with someone else now." "Has that caused any problems?" inquired Miller. Mila laughed. "It sure has. You should have known that. You guys have been out to his home a couple of times when Bud's been causing trouble." Miller and Burgrab locked eyes, and Miller turned and asked, "Do you think that Bud could kill someone?" "Yes," she responded, brushing her hand through her light brown hair, "especially if he is in one of his jealous rages." The officers realized they were onto something and decided to call Bud Sullivan in for an interview. At 6 p.m., Sullivan arrived at the police station, realized that his statement was to be a voluntary interview and that he was not compelled to say anything. Bud said that he understood his rights, but needed to get something off his mind that he had suppressed for far too long. He said that he had initially met Mila Ring at a party. A few days after the party went on, that Mila called him and asked him to go out. On their first date, he picked her up, bought a 12-pack of beer, and drove to the Shawnee National Forest. There, Ring allegedly told Sullivan about an armed robbery she and a male friend had committed in Chester at a Clark station on July 7, 1986. She then told him if he did not consent to sexual relations with her, she would say he was the one during the robbery. Sullivan submitted not wanting to be implicated to an armed robbery. He explained that Mila held this over him during the entire relationship. Further, that because of their age difference and Ring's constant craving for sex, he got to the point that he was unable to handle her sexual needs. Sullivan introduced Mila to Ron Hicks, hoping to take some of the pressure off himself. Sullivan indicated that Mila had at one point had sex with Hicks and said that Hicks was a pig, but she continued to date him. Sullivan told the detectives that the day after Hicks disappeared, Mila came to his home and said that she had killed Ron. She had allegedly told Sullivan that she had parked at the Harrisburg City Park near the swimming pool and that Ron picked her up in his pickup truck. They drove about 12 miles west of Harrisburg onto coal company property, an area Ring knew because her father worked for the coal company and had taken her out there on numerous occasions. They stopped at an abandoned residence and parked in the driveway. Ring supposedly told Hicks she knew a good place out back, behind the abandoned residence. According to Sullivan, Ring told him that Ron and she walked out back. She told him that she had to urinate and asked him to look away. Sullivan said that Hicks turned his back on Ring, who stepped behind a tree. There, she took a .22 caliber pistol out of her purse, stepped out from behind the tree, and shot him. Hicks ran for about 50 feet and then fell. She then walked up to him, who was kneeling with his hands clasped together over his head and emptying her gun into him. Mila walked to the truck, got in, and drove to the county highway garage. And the next day, she related the story to Sullivan and told him if he said anything about it, she would implicate him in the murder as well as the armed robbery. Officers asked Sullivan, "What was Ring's motive?" He answered, "She didn't say and I didn't ask." "Would you submit to a polygraph?" "I'll have to consult my attorney, but probably not." He was asked, "Would you meet and engage Mila Ring in a similar conversation on the above admission?" He replied, "I will." As Sullivan left the police station, and the detectives informed him that he would be in touch with him again. Meanwhile, officers checked with the Chester Police Department to see if an armed robbery had occurred on the date indicated. Also, the officers began to dissect the statements of Ring and Sullivan to determine whose story was viable. Officers confirmed that an armed robbery had occurred, as Sullivan had indicated, and on May 27, 1985 at 11:35 a.m., they arrested Mila Ring and brought her to the Saline County Sheriff's Department. Upon arriving for questioning, Mila surprised the officer extremely emotional. She turned and looked at the officers and said, "I shot him." Burgrop, realizing that she was referring to Hicks, immediately read Mila her rights. Mila then signed a Miranda rights waiver form and agreed to give a verbal statement of the shooting death of Ron Hicks. Mila began her story by informing the detective that she had first dated Bud Sullivan on July 16th in '84. Sullivan had not formally introduced her to Ron Hicks. She had known him, she related, because Bud had taken her car to Hicks for repair work on several occasions. In May of '85, Bud and Mila had a fight. The two friends of hers suggested that she should go out with someone to make Bud jealous. She thought of Ron Hicks because of what Bud had told her and decided to go to his garage and ask Ron to go out with her. Hicks indicated that he would go, but couldn't leave until 5 p.m. Mila told Hicks to meet her at a store which was only a block and a half from Bud's house. They met and drove to the secluded mine road. There, Mila performed oral sex with Ron Hicks, and an hour later they were back at the store where Ron dropped Mila off and drove to his house. Mila waited for about 15 minutes, and her friend picked her up and took her home. Shortly after she got home, Bud called her and she went back to his house. She felt guilty and wanted to tell him what took place. Although she told him that she had gone out with Ron, she didn't tell him about the sexual relations, partly because she didn't want to hurt him, but mostly out of fear of a jealous rage. Bud was suspicious and decided to talk to Ron about it. He went to Ron's house and returned home about an hour later. Bud was depressed and told Mila that Ron had told him the whole story. Bud wanted to drive around for a while, so they got a six-pack and went to the lake. He began talking about how he had done the same things his wife had. He threatened to kill himself and Mila. He said he could not handle the cheating. Days passed and Bud's depression got no better, Mila said. She stated that he constantly reminded her about her cheating on him. He finally told her that she had to dispose of Ron so he could live and not have to look across the street at Ron's house knowing that Ron was over there and that Mila had gone out with him. He began to threaten Mila with a .22 caliber pistol, but set a time limit. Ron had to be dead by July 6th. There was no significance to that date, according to Mila. Bud simply conjured up the date in his head. Milo finally agreed to kill Ron for Bud, and they began to make plans. They decided that the location would be an abandoned house near the coal company about 12 miles west of town. Milo knew the area well since the father had been an employee of the coal company and often taken her with him when she was so small. Bud instructed her to get a .22 caliber pistol that had belonged to her deceased father. Following the plan, Bud then bought ammunition and practiced for several days with the weapon. The plan was set. Milo was to ask Ron to go out, coax him to the location, and then shoot him. She said that she went to Ron's garage and asked him to go out on July 2nd. Ron agreed, and between 6:30 and 7, Bud dropped her off at the nursing home 2 blocks away from the park. She walked to the pool and Ron picked her up. Milo told him she had a place for them to go, and they headed west on Route 13. A few minutes later, Milo and Ron pulled into the driveway of the abandoned home. "Let's go out back," Milo allegedly said. Both exited the truck and walked down a path for a few hundred feet. Milo told Ron to turn around while she urinated. Ron did as he was told, while Milo knelt and fumbled for her gun. She said she then turned around and fired a shot, striking Ron in the upper right shoulder of his back. Ron took off running and fell to the ground. Milo calmly walked up to him and emptied the gun in Hicks' body. Quickly, she told the probers she went to the Hicks truck and put on a brown wig and glasses and instructed by Sullivan to disguise herself in case anyone saw her driving the truck. She took back roads back to Harrisburg and parked the truck at the county highway department. Bud picked her up and then drove to his house. Bud took the gun, the brown wig, and glasses. He was to burn them, but Milo indicated she had seen the wig and glasses no more than 2 weeks ago. The officers ended the interview, charged Milo with murder, and immediately prepared to secure a search warrant for Bud Sullivan's residence. 2 hours later, officers arrived at a white trailer located on West Sloan Street in Harrisburg, the residence of Charles Bud Sullivan. Officers presented him with a search warrant. The residence was cluttered with boxes and stacks of pornographic magazines, and in one corner a jar with a white 4-month-old fetus floated in clear formaldehyde. Sullivan later claimed his ex-wife had a miscarriage and that, try as he may, he could not part with the child. The officers took a black 3-door metal filing cabinet, a brown wig, a pair of eyeglasses, .22 caliber bullets, and a set of truck keys belonging to Ron Hicks. Officers arrested Sullivan for conspiracy to commit murder. Milo Ring and Charles Sullivan were arraigned in the First Circuit Court in Williamson County on June 13, 1986. Milo was charged with the murder of Ron Hicks, and Sullivan was charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Milo was assigned a defense attorney. Within a month, the attorney came forward to the prosecutor and informed him that Milo had not committed the murder, that Bud had pulled the trigger. The crime was committed as she had told the police, except that Sullivan was hiding behind the tree when Milo and Hicks walked around down the path. Then Milo told Hicks to turn around while she was to relieve herself, and Sullivan stepped from behind the tree and shot him. She told the police that she confessed the crime because she feared for her life, because she was afraid Bud might kill her. The prosecutors, Charles Garnotti, and the defense attorney agreed to a reduction of Milo's charges to concealment of a homicide and go light on the sentence if she would plead guilty to the charges and testify against Sullivan in his trial. So on November 11, 1986, physical evidence and testimony by Milo Ring was presented at a jury trial of Charles Bud Sullivan for the murder of Ronald Hicks. 12-person jury found him guilty. Charles Bud Sullivan was sentenced to life in prison on April 27, 1987, and is now serving the sentence in Menard Penitentiary in Chester, Illinois. Milo Ring was sentenced to just 5 years and served that sentence in the Dwight Prince Prison for Women in Northern Illinois. The end. Now, updates. I don't believe Dwight Prison is still open either. I believe that they have move the women around because, of course, there was way more men in the prison systems than the women, and they had 3 facilities for women, and so they just kind of, you know, put all the women, I think, in one facility now, and then, of course, there's dozens, millions, or whatever for the men. But I'm sorry it takes so long for me to read. I'm sorry that sometimes I stutter and slur. But I hope that you enjoy the stories. I myself do. And sometimes it's nice to be read to instead of having to read it yourself. So that's why I do this. There's going to be a little bit of difference to this video. I'm going to try to add some photos in there in the editing. So if it doesn't turn out just perfect, keep giving me a shot, guys. And as always, much love, and take care of yourself and everybody around you. Thank you.